You ever wake up thinking the day's gonna be regular and then the universe throws a Molotov right through your front door? That was Tuesday for the Reynolds family. Calvin was halfway through scrambling eggs when the doorbell rang. He thought it was UPS. Monique had ordered Ava those purple sneakers she'd been obsessing over. But when he opened the door, it wasn't a package. It was a folded piece of paper taped right to the frame, fluttering in the breeze like it couldn't wait to ruin their day. Notice to vacate, 7 days. No warning, no discussion. Just get out. Like they were squatters, not tenants with a lease and receipts to prove it. Monique read it once, twice. Her face didn't move, but her eyes said everything. Rage, confusion, that cold, sharp fear that settles in your chest when the world reminds you, this system, it was never built with you in mind. Calvin stood there, clutching his mug like it might stop his hands from shaking. Ava came down the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes, stopping short when she saw her mom frozen on the porch and her dad staring into space like he'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" Monique didn't answer. Calvin handed her the notice instead. Ava read it, blinked, then scoffed. "Are they serious? That's illegal, right?" Monique finally spoke, voice calm but tight. "That depends, baby, on who's watching. Their landlord, Henry Teller, was the kind of man who wore fake Southern charm, like a cologne. Smiled too hard, talked too slow. Said good people like y'all, in that way that made your skin crawl. Calvin had clocked him day one. But they needed the house. The school district was good. The rent was manageable. And after Monique's overnight shifts and Calvin's after-school tutoring hours, the last thing they wanted was another move. But here they were, unwanted. They called Henry, of course. Straight to voicemail, left messages, sent emails, nothing. Just radio silence and a digital trail of, "Sorry, I'm unavailable right now." Monique drove down to the property office the next day. Dressed sharp, hair up. Nurse badge still clipped to her chest like maybe, just maybe, it would remind them she was a working woman, not some stereotype. But when she asked for an explanation, the receptionist looked her up and down and said, "Your lease was under review for multiple infractions. It's all in the letter." "What infractions?" Monique asked. "Noise complaints, lawn maintenance violations, suspicious visitors." Lies, every single one. Their house was quieter than a monastery. The lawn was cut every Sunday morning by Calvin himself, with his busted mower and YouTube tutorials, and suspicious visitors? Probably Ava's friend Jamil, who wore hoodies and had the nerve to be black in a white neighborhood. Monique left before she said something that would make things worse. But worse was already happening. Later that night, Calvin pulled their lease agreement from the drawer. They'd paid on time every month. The clause about violations? Vague. Open to interpretation. Designed to give the landlord all the power and the tenants none. "They're trying to push us out without saying why," he muttered. "They don't need to say why," Monique replied, pouring herself a glass of wine with a hand that trembled just slightly. "They just want us gone." And she was right. Because beneath the legalese, behind the fake smiles and loophole language, the truth was nasty and simple. Henry Teller didn't want certain kinds of people in his neighborhood. Not loud, not messy, not criminal. Just black. Calvin sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, fingers interlaced like he was praying, but not sure who to pray to. Ava paced back and forth, phone in hand, already Googling eviction rights in Georgia, and can landlords just kick you out? And Monique? She stared at that folded piece of paper on the counter, the word eviction, bold and brutal. The thing about eviction, it's not just losing a roof, it's losing safety, stability, that fragile sense of peace you work your whole damn life to build. And now it was cracking, fast. But here's the thing Henry Teller didn't know. The Reynolds family, they weren't the type to take injustice lying down. They weren't just packing boxes, they were loading ammo. Not bullets, not fists, receipts, cameras, lawyers. And something more dangerous than all three, the will to fight back. Because when the system tries to shove you out the door, sometimes you don't leave. Sometimes you kick it right back open. Henry Teller sat back in his leather chair like he owned the damn city. Which, in his head, he kind of did. The man reeked of bourbon and self-importance. Legs crossed just a little too wide, like even his posture was allergic to humility. The corner booth at Elway's Grill was dimly lit, private, perfect for backdoor deals and shameless bragging. Across from him, his lawyer, Derek Blaine, slicker than a grease spill, raised a glass. Another problem. Removed. Henry clinked his whiskey glass against Derek's and smirked. Cheers to keeping the neighborhood clean. Clean, Derek echoed, grinning like a frat boy who just got away with hazing. Was it the noise, the cars, or just the vibe? Henry chuckled, low and slow. Oh, come on, you know what it is. They weren't trash or anything. He teaches middle school. She's a nurse. Real civil types, but still, not the right fit. The word fit hung in the air like a racial slur wearing a tuxedo. That daughter of theirs, Henry went on, swirling his drink, always hanging around with those friends. Skateboards, loud music, hoodies. I mean, it's subtle, but it starts with one family and next thing you know, boom, property value drop. Derek nodded like this was just economics, not racism wrapped in realtor speak. You covered yourself legally, right? Henry tapped his temple. Always. I had the grounds. You know, excessive noise complaints, property maintenance negligence, unapproved guests, the usual dog whistle violations. You're a damn pro. Henry grinned wider, like he'd just won a game of Monopoly with real lives. Gotta protect what's mine. My granddaddy built this neighborhood. My dad doubled the portfolio. Me, I'm just continuing the legacy. Derek leaned in. And if they fight it, Henry snorted, they won't. People like them don't have the money or the time. They'll fold and move quietly, always do. That's when fate smirked and poured herself a drink too. Because, Henry had no idea who he'd just poked. See, Henry thought the Reynolds were docile. The head down, pay your rent, don't make waves type. What he didn't know was that Calvin taught more than math. He taught resistance. That Monique had seen the inside of too many hospitals to be scared of another white man with a clipboard. And Ava? She was raised on James Baldwin quotes and protest playlists. Henry thought he'd evicted a problem. What he'd actually done, he'd activated one. Back at the Reynolds home, they weren't sulking. They were strategizing. Calvin had already pulled the lease and was cross-referencing clauses. Monique was typing up a complaint to the Fair Housing Commission like she was drafting a patient's chart. Precise, clinical, bulletproof. Ava had pulled up Henry's public property records and found 3 past settlements for tenant misunderstandings. This man's got a whole career of shady behavior, she said, eyes burning. We're not the first. Calvin looked up. Then maybe we'll be the last. See, Henry played the long game. Bought up homes one by one, rented to preferred families, then jacked up the rent as the street got whiter and wealthier. It was gentrification with a smile and a southern drawl, and it had worked until now. Because this time, the family he pushed out had nothing left to lose but patience. And Henry Teller was about to learn that when you build your empire on quiet prejudice and pretty paperwork, all it takes is one loud truth to tear it down. He laughed too soon, he drank too much, and he bragged a little too loud about cleaning up the neighborhood. But karma doesn't knock. She breaks the damn door down. The walls echoed more now, like even the house was mourning. No yelling, no plates thrown, no melodramatic tears running down cheeks. Just cardboard, tape, and quiet. The kind of quiet that hums heavy in your chest like grief with no funeral. Monique folded Ava's clothes with surgical precision, one pile at a time. Like if she kept her hands moving fast enough, her heart wouldn't catch up. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, earbuds in, blasting protest songs while silently peeling stickers off her bedroom wall, each rip like a tiny heartbreak. And Calvin? He was in the garage, stuffing lesson plans into a milk crate, jaw clenched so tight it looked carved in stone. It wasn't their first move. Hell, it wasn't even their third. But this one hurt different, because this time they'd done everything right. Calvin had fixed the leaky sink with YouTube and borrowed tools. Monique had planted tulips out front every spring. Ava had kept her grades up and never missed curfew. And still, they were being booted out like a mistake someone wanted to erase. Boxes stacked against the door like barricades. Ava had labeled hers in thick Sharpie, not trash. And the silence? It wasn't weakness. It was survival. The kind you learn when the system tells you not to scream. Because screaming gets labeled as aggressive, or unstable, or a reason to evict. They were tired of being a reason. Halfway through taping up the dishes, Calvin's phone buzzed. He wiped his hands on his jeans and answered without looking. "Calvin?" A voice said, familiar, warm, his cousin Deja. "Yeah, you okay?" He hesitated. He could have lied, could have said, "just moving," could have thrown on that fake grin like a social media filter. But something in her tone cracked the silence. "We got pushed out again," he said flatly. Deja didn't gasp, didn't flinch, just said, "Send me the paperwork." His throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I know a guy who knows a woman who owes me a favor. And because I'm tired of this shit happening to good people." He blinked hard. "But hard. You think we have a case? I think you have me." And just like that, for the first time that week, he felt the silence shift. Like maybe they weren't alone in it. Like maybe that silence could turn into something louder, righteous even. He hung up and walked into the living room. Monique looked up, her eyes questioning. "She wants the papers," he said. "Says we've got a shot." Monique didn't say anything, just nodded once. The kind of nod that says then, "Let's get to work." Ava pulled out her earbuds. "What's going on?" Calvin met her gaze. "We're not done." Her lips lifted, barely. But it was the first sign of hope since that damn notice hit their door. The truck came just before sunset. The driver looked bored, chewing on sunflower seeds and scrolling through his phone. To him, it was just another job, another family, another move. But to the Reynolds, it was another chapter. One they didn't write, but one they were damn sure gonna edit. They loaded the boxes, closed the doors, didn't cry, didn't scream. But deep in their bones, something shifted. This wasn't surrender. This was the calm before the storm. Henry Teller strolled into the courthouse like it was just another Tuesday. Button-down shirt, smug little smirk, sunglasses still perched on his head like he was about to hit the golf course. His lawyer, Derek Blaine, trailed behind him, holding a slim leather briefcase and sipping iced coffee like this was going to be in and out. 15 minutes max. A rubber-stamped victory. Just a formality. Henry had done this dance before, dozens of times. Serve the notice, cite the violations, bring up some grainy camera footage of unauthorized guests and untrimmed hedges. Then let the system take care of the rest. The judge would nod, scribble, and boom. Eviction upheld. Easy money. But today had a vibe. One of those static charged, oh, you're about to screw around and find out kind of vibes. And Henry didn't catch it until he walked through the double doors, swagger in full effect, and locked eyes with the woman on the bench. Judge Naomi Ellis, calm, composed, black, and from the way she was staring at him, completely, utterly unimpressed. His smile twitched. "Who's that?" he muttered to Derek. Derek leaned it in, whispering like a nervous kid. "That's Judge Ellis. Took over this docket 2 weeks ago. Civil housing and tenant disputes." Henry's brows knit. "Where's Judge Winthrop?" "Retired." "Since when?" "Since last Tuesday." Henry didn't respond. He just looked up at the bench again, at Judge Ellis's face, cool as ice, but sharp like a blade. This woman wasn't here to play favorites. She wasn't here to nod along and get to lunch early. She was here to listen, which meant Henry had a problem. The courtroom itself was small, barely 2 rows of seating, but it felt tight, like the walls had leaned in to watch. Calvin Reynolds sat near the front with Monique at his side, both dressed with quiet defiance. No theatrics, no drama, just dignity. Ava wasn't there, but her absence spoke volumes. Some things are too heavy to witness twice. Judge Ellis scanned the room, then looked down at the folder in front of her. "Mr. Teller," she said, her voice steady and clipped, "please approach." Henry stepped forward, chest puffed. "Good morning, Your Honor." She didn't respond to the greeting, just flipped through the paperwork like she was handling something that smelled off. "I've reviewed the documentation your team submitted," she said without looking up. "The violations you cited as grounds for eviction." "Yes, ma'am," he said with fake Southern charm. "Just doing my duty to maintain standards. Gotta keep the community up to par, you know?" "That was the wrong move." Judge Ellis slowly raised her head. Her stare cut through him like heat through glass. "Tell me, Mr. Teller, how long have the Reynolds lived in your property?" "Just over a year, I believe." "Any missed payments?" "No." "Police involvement, vandalism, complaints from neighbors on file?" Well, not police exactly, but I've received concerns. From whom? Henry hesitated. Anonymous sources, emails mostly. Judge Ellis tilted her head slightly. So you're attempting to remove a family with no payment issues, no verified complaints based on vague infractions and unsigned emails. Derek stepped in, voice oily. Your Honor, the lease allows the landlord discretion to determine violations that impact the community's overall safety and presentation. That's a dangerous amount of discretion, Mr. Blaine, Ellis said coolly, especially when it seems to align suspiciously with patterns of selective enforcement. Henry shifted in place. I'm just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, Judge. From who? She asked. Silence. Judge Ellis leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. I see the Reynolds have submitted a response with supporting documentation. Dated photos of lawn upkeep. Noise complaint records that show zero formal citations. Affidavits from 2 neighbors confirming they've never experienced a disturbance. And receipts for every rent payment, paid early. She paused. So tell me, Mr. Teller, what are you really trying to remove? Henry's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just air and panic. I'm placing a temporary injunction on this eviction, Judge Ellis said flatly, effective immediately. I'm also forwarding this case to the Fair Housing Authority for review of potential discriminatory practices. Derek's jaw tightened. Your Honor, that's premature. No, Mr. Blaine. What's premature is kicking a family out of their home based on gut feelings and half-truths. She turned to Calvin and Monique. You are not required to vacate the premises. You will receive official notice once this review is complete. Until then, your rights as tenants remain fully protected. Monique blinked hard. Calvin's fingers twitched, like they were itching to reach for hers. Henry stood there, his face a cocktail of confusion and fury, disbelief practically dripping from his pores. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to win. Judge Ellis leaned back in her chair, completely composed. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit the wood like a thunderclap. Henry Teller didn't move. He'd spent his whole life playing a rigged game. But today, the dealer changed. Henry Teller was pissed. Not the kind of pissed you yell about in traffic. This was the slow-burning, ego-bruised, how dare they kind. The courtroom humiliation still stuck to him like sweat in a cheap suit. He kept replaying it in his head, the way that judge looked at him, like he was the trash on the sidewalk instead of the man who owned the building. The way she said, "What are you really trying to remove?" Like she already knew the answer and just wanted him to say it out loud. He'd stormed out of the courthouse with Derek Blaine speed-walking behind him, rattling off damage control. We'll appeal, file an injunction, go after the judge's bias if we have to. Maybe she's got some activist baggage. But Henry wasn't listening. He was still trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. This morning, he returned. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. The judge had ordered a review hearing. Apparently, she wanted to go on record with new disclosures. Whatever. He figured she was covering her ass, making it look like she was being fair. He could play along, smile, pretend to be a law-abiding citizen for 15 more minutes. So he walked in, shoulders back, cocky as hell. Judge Naomi Ellis was already seated. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just gestured for him to approach. He stood before her, smug and ready to get it over with. Mr. Teller, she began, her voice as cool as the marble walls around them. Before we proceed, I need to ask you a simple question. He licked his lips. All right. Do you know the name Calvin Reynolds? He scoffed without thinking. Yeah, some tenant I had to kick out. What about him? Silence. The kind that drops the room into free fall. Judge Ellis stared at him, completely still. Then, with surgical precision, she said, He's my cousin. Every sound in the courtroom stopped midair. A file slid half an inch across the clerk's desk and nobody breathed. The bailiff, who had been leaning against the wall like a bored statue, suddenly stood a little straighter, hands folding tighter at his belt. Derek Blaine shifted beside Henry like he'd just been gut-punched. Henry blinked. Once. Twice. His mouth opened, but his brain didn't catch up in time. I didn't know that, he stammered. That much is obvious, Judge Ellis replied, her tone clipped and cold. Which is why I'm disclosing it now, on record. Henry felt his pulse tap dance in his neck. She kept going. My cousin has lived in Charleston his entire life. Educated, law-abiding, stable. He's a husband, a father, and a middle school teacher of math and, ironically, conflict resolution. Derek tried to interrupt. Your Honor, if this creates a conflict, this does not create a conflict. This is transparency. And now that everyone in this room understands the full context, let's move forward. Henry's voice came out smaller than he expected. So, you're not recusing yourself? Judge Ellis leaned in slightly. No, Mr. Teller, I'm not. Because I trust myself to separate personal relationships from legal duty. Can you say the same about your decisions as a landlord? Henry clenched his jaw. I'm not the one on trial. Not yet, she replied. And that was it. She didn't raise her voice, didn't pound the gavel. Just let that sentence hang in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Because what Henry hadn't realized until that exact moment was this. He didn't just evict a tenant. He'd pissed off the wrong family. And now, the bench had blood ties. And she was about to turn this courtroom into a reckoning. You could feel it in the room, that shift, that quiet pressure drop that happens right before a storm rolls in. The temperature didn't change, but the air sure did. Henry still sat like he ran the place. Legs wide, arms folded, that smug half-grin plastered on his face, like he hadn't just been verbally bodied in the last hearing. Derek Blaine, on the other hand, he looked like he needed antacids and a vacation. Judge Naomi Ellis flipped through the file in front of her with deliberate care. Not rushed, not flustered, just thorough. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her pen moved like a scalpel. And then she looked up, pinning them both in place with a gaze that didn't blink. We're going to walk through this step by step, she said, calm but slicing. Mr. Blaine, please direct me to the first documented violation you submitted as grounds for eviction. Derek cleared his throat and stood. Yes, Your Honor, on page 7 of the complaint packet. There was a reported noise complaint dated, he flipped frantically. October 3rd, around 10:42 p.m. She waited, silent. Filed by a neighbor, he continued. Said there was excessive music, disturbances. Judge Ellis tapped the file once. This one? Yes. She lifted the paper and held it up. There's no signature, no apartment number, no official incident report attached. Derek blinked. Well, it was an informal complaint submitted via email. Where is the email? He hesitated. It wasn't included with the filing. And why not? Henry cut in. I mean, Judge, not every complaint needs to be printed out. We get a lot of little things. People tell us stuff all the time. That may be true, Judge Ellis said smoothly. But this court does not make decisions based on hearsay and hallway gossip, Mr. Teller. Henry's mouth snapped shut. She turned back to the file. All right, next violation. Derek flipped again, slower now. Failure to maintain yard appearance, photos included, pages 9 through 11. She examined the grainy, time-stamped photos. A patch of lawn, a trash can not quite at the curb, a rake leaning against the porch. These were taken at what time? 2:15 p.m. And the Reynolds were at work during this time? As far as I know. So you're penalizing tenants for not having a perfectly staged yard in the middle of a weekday afternoon? Well, maintenance was a term of the lease. Judge Ellis arched a brow. So is providing habitable conditions and equal treatment. Did you photograph the yards of any other tenants on this street that same day? No, Your Honor. Why not? Silence. She closed the file, fingers laced together. Her tone dropped half an octave. This file is full of vague infractions, non-verifiable complaints, and conveniently timed violations. You claim due process, but this looks less like policy enforcement and more like targeted harassment. Henry shifted in his seat. Judge, with respect, I've managed properties for 15 years. This is standard protocol. No, Mr. Teller, she said, eyes locked. This is a pattern. One I've seen play out too many times in too many zip codes. A black family moves in, the infractions start piling up. Things that would be quirks for white tenants suddenly become grounds for eviction. Derek whispered, We're going off course here. We're finally on course, she snapped, tone sharp enough to slice paper. And if this case were any more transparent, I could read it without opening the folder. Derek sat down slowly, the fight leaking out of him. Judge Ellis turned to Calvin and Monique, seated quietly, hands clasped together like anchors. You've handled this with grace and restraint, she said. More than most could. Monique nodded once, calm but tired. We just want to live in peace. And now you will. Judge Ellis turned back to the court. The eviction order is hereby voided. All legal actions against the Reynolds are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am submitting a formal referral to the South Carolina Fair Housing Commission to review Mr. Teller's practices for potential discriminatory violations. Henry sat stone still. Color drained from his face. The courtroom didn't erupt, but you could feel it. Something shifting, something cracking. Power had changed hands. Not with screaming, not with fists, but with facts, receipts, and a judge who wasn't afraid to call discrimination by its real name. Judge Naomi Ellis didn't take lunch that day. She didn't want a salad, a coffee, or even 5 minutes of silence. She wanted names, dates, patterns, and justice. The door to her chambers clicked shut behind her, and she tossed the Teller case file onto the desk like it had personally offended her, which, in a way, it had. Behind her, her clerk, Marissa, sharp-eyed and chronically underestimated, entered with a stack of folders nearly toppling out of her arms. These are every eviction filed by Henry Teller in Charleston County in the last 5 years, Marissa said, dropping them onto the desk with a satisfying thud. Jesus, Ellis muttered. That's heavier than his conscience. If he had one. Ellis sat, opened the first file, and started reading. By the second file, her brow furrowed. By the seventh, her lips had vanished into a tight line. By the 12th, she was vibrating. Each folder read like a copy-paste job. Excessive noise. Unpermitted guests. Failure to maintain yard standards. Over and over. No police reports. No signed complaints. Barely any photos, and when there were, they showed normalcy. A grill on a porch. A child's bike left by the steps. One violation even included a picture of a family dog sitting on a front lawn, leashed. Marissa stood beside her, flipping through her own pile. Out of the 33 evictions he filed, 24 were against families of color. Ellis looked up. How many pushed back? Marissa sighed. 6, 2 with legal aid, 4 self-represented, none successful. Ellis sat back, hands steepled beneath her chin. And how many ended in early exits, settlements, or sealed court records? Marissa's jaw ticked. Almost all of them. A knock on the door. It opened without waiting. Sorry to barge in, said a voice, fast, bright, and familiar. Kara Singh, legal aid's pit bull in a pantsuit. 5 feet of fury with a laptop and a vendetta. You called, Kara said, sliding a flash drive across the desk. Here's what I've got. Teller's eviction filings, complaint patterns, tenant income brackets, and addresses. Guess what? The farther you get from the white part of town, the faster the clock ticks on his leases. Ellis plugged in the drive, on screen. A spreadsheet that looked more like a battlefield than a database. Color-coded lines, date stamps, red highlights marking suspicious patterns. 18 families in 5 years, Kara said, leaning over the desk. Mostly black and Latino. All under lease violations that never held up. None of them had the time, money, or emotional gas to fight him. It was precision displacement. Legal enough to pass, ugly enough to sting. Ellis felt her stomach twist. Not from surprise, from recognition. She'd seen this playbook before. Called urban renewal in the 80s, rezoning in the 90s. Now it was just called policy. But the victims were always the same. They didn't even know they had a choice, Ellis whispered. They thought leaving quietly was safer. They always do, Kara said, until someone makes noise. Marissa leaned forward. We can reopen them. Start with one, find a clean pattern. The Reynolds case gives us standing. Ellis nodded slowly. Then we build a case, not just against Teller, but against the system that let him thrive. Kara grinned. You ready to piss off some rich white landlords? Ellis's eyes burned like coals. Please, that's my hobby now. She stood, pulling a yellow legal pad from her drawer. On the top line, she wrote, Target, systemic pattern of discriminatory eviction, H. Teller. Underneath it, she wrote a list. Reynolds, active case. Suarez, 2021. Eviction unrepresented. Nguyen, 2018, excessive trash. No photo evidence. Lewis, 2020, family of 4, sealed settlement. Torres, minor noise complaint, no documentation. And next to each name, she drew a check mark. Then, she paused and wrote 3 words in all caps. They fought back. And this time, they weren't fighting alone. It started with a subject line. Judge slams landlord for racial evictions. No name, no sender. Just a clean little whisper dropped into the inbox of the Post and Courier's most persistent reporter, Janelle Harper, a journalist known for chasing corruption like it owed her money. She'd broken stories that made mayors sweat and school boards quit mid-meeting. So when she opened that email, she knew. This wasn't spam. This was gasoline looking for a match. Inside was a PDF, clean scan, courtroom transcript, verified timestamp. And right at the center of it, Judge Naomi Ellis, dressing down Henry Teller like she was peeling layers off an onion, exposing every tear-inducing detail of his evictions. Janelle leaned back in her chair, reread it twice, then cracked her knuckles. "This is gonna burn," she whispered. She made a couple calls, pulled some court records, connected some dots. 5 hours later, the article was live. Charleston Judge Freezes Eviction, Cites Pattern of Racial Bias, by Janelle Harper, investigative reporter. The story opened like a punch to the face. A local landlord with a history of housing violations is now under scrutiny for targeting families of color in a pattern that a Charleston judge called less like due process, more like discrimination. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. Not just Charleston, not just South Carolina. National blogs picked it up. Legal Twitter went nuclear. TikToks were made. One even had dramatic music and a slideshow of Henry's properties with a voiceover saying, "Meet the landlord who finally got caught." Henry Teller read the headline. Mid-bite of a croissant. He choked, spit flakes onto his cashmere pullover, and stared at the screen like it personally betrayed him. Smiling photo of Judge Ellis. Grainy photo of his worst haircut. Headline in bold. Systemic racism in housing? His phone buzzed. A group chat. The boys lit up. He opened it, expecting jokes, memes, something. Nothing. Just a string of people leaving the chat. Ping, ping, ping. Doug has left the conversation. Henry swallowed hard and dialed. No answer. He tried his lawyer. Straight to voicemail. "Derek, call me now. This is blowing up." He tried Rick. Rick from the Charleston Club, who once said Henry was one of the last good guys. Voicemail. Then Stan, his old college roommate. They'd co-invested in a duplex once, bonded over stocks and tough love politics. Voicemail. He tried his city council contact. Nada. Even the smug old bastard who ran the HOA board didn't pick up. Panic, thick and hot, crawled into his throat. He flipped on the news. There it was. Judge Ellis at the center of a panel discussion. Calm, sharp, dignified. Talking about decades of weaponized policy cloaked in legality. He threw the remote. Glass shattered. Because this wasn't just a bad week. This was his name on every screen. This was realtors canceling showings. This was mortgage lenders putting calls on hold. This was law students sharing Google Docs titled Teller v. Ethics. Henry wasn't just losing the case. He was losing the narrative. And in his world, that was worse. The day Calvin Reynolds filed the lawsuit, there weren't any cameras. No speeches. No flashy press conference. Just a quiet man in a button-up shirt holding a folder that weighed more than it looked, standing in front of a federal clerk with his hands slightly shaking. But not from fear, from focus. Encouraged by Naomi Ellis, who'd offered more than just a legal assist, but the blueprint to burn it all down and rebuild it better. Calvin had taken the leap. The suit named Henry Teller directly. It cited the Fair Housing Act, Section 3604, racial discrimination, targeted eviction, constructive displacement, a pattern of behavior that didn't just cross the line, it danced on it with steel-toe boots. Calvin filed the papers with a calm face and storm eyes. And when he stepped outside, a local news crew just happened to be waiting. He didn't run. He didn't grandstand. He simply said, "We deserve to live where we're not hunted for existing," then walked away. That clip went viral in under an hour. But Calvin wasn't alone anymore. By the end of the week, 5 more families came forward. Then 7. Then 12. People who had packed their things in silence now found their voices in solidarity. Names once hidden behind confidential settlements started reappearing on affidavits and interview lists. Monique spoke next. She didn't sugarcoat a damn thing. In a sit-down interview on Channel 6, her voice didn't crack once, but her words cut like bone saws. "Do you know what it feels like to work 16 hours in a trauma ward, come home to your family, and find out you're being evicted because someone decided you felt out of place in your own house? The anchor didn't respond. Couldn't. She kept going. We followed every rule. We smiled when we wanted to scream. And still, that wasn't enough. And it's never just about losing a house. It's about losing peace. About our daughter waking up in the middle of the night because she heard footsteps and thought it was another inspection. That line hit like a body blow. Because the inspections weren't random. Ava told her side next, sitting stiffly in front of a courtroom packed with lawyers and journalists. She was nervous, sure, but she didn't shrink. He said they were maintenance checks, she told the court, her hands clasped in her lap. But it was always the same two guys. One would stay in the kitchen. The other would ask if I was home alone. Gasps. No one tried to hide them. She looked directly at Henry across the courtroom, her voice steady. I was 14. I still remember how his eyes looked at me like I was a problem to fix. Henry, sitting beside his newest lawyer, because Derek had dipped as soon as the press turned, couldn't even hold her gaze. His face was a cocktail of rage and rot. The city around him, the one he used to walk through like a king on his land, had shifted. People didn't greet him anymore. The regular waiter at his favorite cafe wouldn't make eye contact. One of his properties got graffitied. Just one word: evict this. He tried calling in favors again. No one bit. The mayor's office politely declined his lunch invitation. His bank account was flagged for irregular withdrawals. Someone had posted his name and face on Reddit with a running thread of all his legal dirt. The neighborhood Facebook group renamed itself Tenants Against Teller. Even the damn golf course pulled his membership. His world, so carefully curated, so manicured and clean, was collapsing. Meanwhile, Calvin and Monique, they didn't want vengeance. They wanted change. The suit picked up steam. National civil rights groups joined in. Legal aid offered pro bono support to other families filing similar suits. The Department of Housing and Urban Development opened a formal investigation. Judge Ellis authorized a local review board to reassess the eviction filings from the last 10 years. The city's skyline hadn't changed, but the energy had. Tenants were talking to each other now, comparing notes, asking questions, calling out landlords who acted like little gods with overpriced leases and selective memory. And Henry Teller? He wasn't just losing a lawsuit. He was losing control. By the time the subpoena landed on Henry Teller's doorstep, it was too late to run. He didn't answer the door when the process server knocked. Just watched through the blinds, sweating in a robe that hadn't been washed in a week. The papers slid under the door. Like karma didn't need permission to walk in. Subpoena, Henry M. Teller, Re. Federal civil rights suit plus city audit investigation. And right beneath that, the words comprehensive financial disclosure required. That was the real hit. The paperwork was one thing, but the audit? That was the wrecking ball. Within days, Henry's carefully curated image, successful landlord, proud Charleston native, generational investor, was exposed for what it really was, a con with a dress code. The forensic accounting team didn't play. They tore through his records like wolves. LLCs with sketchy filing dates, consulting fees paid to shell companies registered to P.O. boxes, tax write-offs on properties that had been vacant for years. And worst of all, a set of internal emails leaked by a former assistant, containing the phrase that would headline every newspaper in Charleston. Keep it clean. No more low-income noise. Aim for visual consistency. Visual consistency. They didn't even try to code it well. Just polished racism pretending to be policy. And then came the maps. Property, heat maps showing which units were flagged for transition. Almost every one of them occupied by Black or Latino tenants. Some red circles were dated years ago, right before those families got pushed out. Turns out, Henry's version of cleaning up the neighborhood wasn't just casual bigotry. It was part of an unofficial scheme, an off-the-books operation between select landlords, real estate speculators, and two city council aides with just enough power to manipulate housing inspections, code violations, and zoning requests. It was all about churn. Push out the families who lowered the aesthetic, jack up the rent, bring in better fits, pocket the profit, repeat. It worked for years, until now. The Charleston City Council couldn't ignore the noise anymore. Not with protests outside City Hall. Not with front-page stories stacking up like body counts. Not with Judge Naomi Ellis dragging their silence into daylight every time she stepped into chambers. So they launched a formal investigation. One by one, Henry's allies dropped him like a hot stone. The HOA president released a statement saying, "We had no knowledge of discriminatory activity." The mayor's office cut ties. Local banks quietly froze lines of credit. His phone used to buzz with opportunities. Now it just buzzed with subpoenas, debt collection alerts, and reporters asking for comment. And his empire? It wasn't falling apart. It was crashing. Tenants stopped paying rent at over a dozen of his properties. Organized collective action backed by legal aid, and a wave of community support. Half the buildings needed repairs he could no longer afford. Contractors refused to work with him. Property managers quit en masse. Meanwhile, Naomi Ellis? She kept her foot on the gas. Her courtroom was full daily, not just with lawsuits, but with people, eyes wide, ears open, watching the city shift. And Calvin Reynolds? He stood outside one of Henry's buildings, surrounded by press. A fresh court filing in hand. "We were never the problem," he said. "We were just the part they wanted to erase." And now, that eraser was smudged, broken, and being turned on the ones who held it. For once, Naomi Ellis wasn't behind the bench. She sat in the gallery like everyone else. Hair pinned, expression unreadable. But her hands, those hands that once slammed a gavel loud enough to shatter silence, were folded calmly in her lap. Next to her sat Calvin, suit crisp, eyes locked on the front of the courtroom. His knee bounced just enough to betray the storm underneath. Monique sat behind him, back straight, hands gently on Ava's shoulders. The gallery was packed wall to wall. Reporters, activists, former tenants, and curious citizens who once said, "That kind of thing doesn't happen here." Well, here it was, on full display. No edits, no denials, just justice, on trial and about to speak. Up front, Judge Leon Whitaker, gray hair, sharp eyes, zero tolerance for performative nonsense, cleared his throat. His voice rang out clean, clear, final. In the case of Reynolds v. Teller and the consolidated civil actions brought forward under federal housing and civil rights statutes, this court finds the defendant, Henry M. Teller. Pause. Someone in the back coughed. The room held its breath like it could collapse if anyone exhaled too early. Guilty of housing discrimination, unlawful eviction practices, and systemic civil rights violations. Boom! That was the moment. You could feel it. The collective exhale. The emotion that twisted in people's chests for years finally slipping loose. Not a cheer, not a roar, just silence. Thick with disbelief, thick with relief, thick with the weight of finally being seen. Judge Whitaker wasn't done. As a result of these findings, this court orders compensatory and punitive damages to be paid to the plaintiffs. Total amount, $2.3 million. Henry Teller didn't move, not even a twitch. He sat like a crumbling statue, staring straight ahead, jaw slack, pupils blown wide like he was still waiting for someone, anyone, to save him. But no one came. No lawyer whispered strategy in his ear. No councilman slipped him a nod from the corner. The gallery was packed, but he was utterly alone. Naomi didn't look at him, not once. She kept her gaze forward, steady. But Calvin? He did, just for a moment. And what he saw wasn't a villain in victory's shadow. It was a man unraveling under the weight of his own arrogance. He's not the system, Calvin thought, but he fed it, laughed with it, profited from it. And now it had spit him out. Judge Whitaker stood. This court will now move forward with recommendations for additional state investigations into Mr. Teller's business practices, licensing, and ongoing contractual relationships with city housing commissions. Translation: this was just the beginning. More lawsuits were coming. More names were being uncovered. Henry's little empire, it wasn't just falling. It was sinking. As the court adjourned, Naomi finally spoke, but only to Calvin. "You good?" He nodded. "Getting there." Naomi smiled, small but real. "This wasn't just for you." "I know." Ava turned to her dad, face beaming. "So, we won?" Calvin looked at her, at all of them. His wife, his daughter, his cousin who put the first crack in the wall. "We did more than win," he said. "We changed the rules." The courthouse doors creaked open and spilled sunlight across the stone steps like some cosmic spotlight. Calvin stepped out first, suit jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the crowd not with fear, but with pride. Naomi followed, heels clicking with calm authority, her robe long gone, but her presence still heavy enough to make the city tremble. The press surged forward, mics raised, cameras flashing, voices firing questions like rapid fire. But the cousins didn't flinch. They didn't need to speak for the story to scream. They stood together at the top of the steps, shoulder to shoulder, the wind tugging at Calvin's collar and lifting Naomi's curls like the universe was trying to frame them just right. "You didn't just fight back," Naomi said, voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You burned down the whole damn machine." Calvin cracked a smile. Not wide, not performative, just real. The kind that rises up from your chest when you know your ancestors are watching and nodding slow. "You gave me the match," he replied. Naomi chuckled, the weight on her shoulders finally feeling a little lighter. "I just reminded you where to strike." Down below, the reporters kept shouting. The flashbulbs kept popping. But the real moment wasn't in their questions. It was in what had already changed. Henry Teller was gone, not just from court, but from the neighborhood, the headlines, and the future. His name was now a cautionary tale, a case study, a footnote to a revolution. And the city? It was beginning to look different. Landlords were being reviewed, inspectors audited. Families who once suffered in silence were forming tenants' unions, sharing documents, filing petitions. Naomi's chambers had a waiting list. Calvin's inbox was full of messages that began with, "I thought I was alone." But the final note didn't come from a judge or a lawyer. It came in a letter. Soft blue envelope, thin gold foil lettering. Ava opened it at the kitchen table that evening. She'd barely said a word all day. Too overwhelmed, too wired from watching her dad become a symbol. She unfolded the letter slowly, eyes scanning the words once, then again. Her voice, small and steady, filled the room as she read aloud. "Dear Ava Reynolds, we're pleased to inform you that you have been selected as the inaugural recipient of the Grace Evelyn Reynolds Memorial Scholarship for Youth Advocacy and Social Justice. Your voice mattered, your courage mattered, your story helped change the law. And now, we honor your grandmother's legacy by helping you write the next chapter." Ava looked up, blinking fast. Calvin reached across the table, took her hand. Monique wiped one quiet tear from her cheek and smiled the kind of smile only women who've survived hell can smile. Naomi stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her family glow. Justice didn't just knock. It walked through this front door, dropped its bags, and made itself at home.